Welcome back. You're watching The Globe. Earlier, we reported on labour unions welcoming Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan's intention to reconstitute the Eskom Board. This comes after the power utility failed to address power supply constraints that have plagued the country for more than a decade now. Energy analyst Ted Blom joins us now for a bit more on this story. Ted, thanks very much indeed for joining us. The SAFTU General Secretary, Zwelinzi Mavavi, says that reconstituting the board announcement is a non-announcement because this board term expired in 2021 already.
That's indeed correct. This change or reshuffle is long overdue. I think anybody could see after the first year that board wasn't functioning properly, and that with the continued load shedding, that something drastic was needed. But it seems to me that the Department of Public Enterprise, acted like a civil servant department and just gave them more leeway and more leeway and more leeway, until we reach a situation where it's totally untenable.
What went wrong? I mean, this board has space for 13 non-executive directors, and there are only 6. And those that remained after many resignations said, please, Mr. Minister, we need to fill this board. That didn't happen. So do you think that the board was shortchanged, or that the board just never had the ability?
Well, firstly, the board wasn't properly constituted from day one. You remember that the CEO at that time was Mr. Java Mabuza, whom I had the pleasure of meeting on more than one occasion. I mean, even Mr. Mabuza was not appointed by the board. He was appointed directly by the president. Now, I mean, as far as governance is concerned, that's totally untenable. And even this board was not chosen on merit or for its expertise. It was once again some sort of cadre deployment, and just the results of that has just been totally disastrous. So yes, the board has been shortchanged because they have asked for additional supplementation of for the resigning members. But the bottom line is the ones who jumped ship were probably the clever ones, and the ones who are holding on are the ones who probably don't have other alternatives as far as lucrative income is concerned. So I think the whole lot needs to be just disbanded, and a new board, properly constituted with proper expertise, needs to be constituted. And I've been calling for that for quite some time now. And I thought it's fallen on deaf ears. It just seems to me that there's a lot of wax in somebody's ears because they haven't been reacting fast enough.
Is there anything that you can give them benefit for to say that the board, under difficult circumstances, were able to do X, Y, Z? Professor Makgoba says that they did the best they could under the circumstances.
Unfortunately, the best is not good enough. The professor himself was way out of depth in terms of expertise, and as the rest of the members of the board. So no, I've got no sympathy for that board. In fact, I would have thought that if anybody has a clear conscience, they would decide when they get an invitation to join a board, they would decide whether they can contribute to that board or not. But unfortunately, the mentality in this country is, with all the unemployment, that if you get an opportunity, you grab it with both hands and you hold on as tight as hell. That's not the way it's supposed to happen. If you find that you're out of your depth or you're not able to contribute professionally, then the onus is on you as a director to actually step aside, which the majority of this board eventually did. But it seems to me some of the diehards just can't let go.
The Public Enterprises Minister has said that a process will begin to reconstitute and restructure the board. Before we talk about who sits on this board, should the structure change, and what should it look like?
Well, you know what? When Eskom won the global award in New York City in 2001, the structure was totally different to what it is at the moment. And I think that if we can reassemble some of the better elements of that board, then I think we might make a move forward. And the previous board was constituted not by political appointees, but by stakeholders from industry, labor, and the general public. And the stakeholders from industry had the largest number of members present. And that was important because it is in their interest to keep the electricity costs as low as possible, to keep the supply as stable as possible and as reliable as possible. And they judiciously, for nearly 90 years, looked after those duties. And that's why Eskom eventually became a world-renowned utility. And it just shows you the folly of meddling with something that actually works well, and to replace people who had a proper stakeholder role with political appointees. So yes, if we can go back to a stakeholder representative board, which represents the industry, especially heavy industry, labor, and the general South African public, with no political appointees, I think we'll be taking a step forward. But that's maybe too high a price to ask for this compromised ANC government.
So are you suggesting that the current authorities can't be trusted to constitute a board that Eskom deserves going forward? Because it looks as if they weren't able to do it the first time around. What faith is there for us to think that they might be able to do a better job this time around?
Well, I've got very little confidence that the Department of Public Enterprises is able to do a proper job in constituting a board. If they'd done the job properly in the first place, we wouldn't have sat with this disaster, not only at Eskom, but at all the other SOEs as well. So let's give them the last chance and see who they come up with. And if I'm asked, I will gladly do an evaluation and make a comment in that regard. But if Eskom is too important to fail, well then Eskom is too important to have cronies and cadre deployment going on. We need to have a proper constituted board, one that will take ownership of the problems, not duck and dive like the current board has been doing, and hopefully it will be a fulfilled board that will have all the skills required to constitute a proper and a balanced board.
So who should be sitting on this board then? Should we be bringing back some people that were at Eskom for years and have seen it in its time of glory? Well,
I mean, I'm not going to mention any names, with respect, Peter, because I don't want to give them the kiss of death. But the fact of the matter is that, yes, you need to get people who, they might be a bit long in the tooth, but who know what good looks like. We can't fiddle around trying to try different experiments while South Africa is burning. So, yes, fortunately, the team that I'm familiar with and have worked with in the past know what good looks like. They have a template. They can just go back in, revive that template, and hopefully hit the ground running, rather than a bunch of novices like we've tried it in the past, who have no value to add, and who had to use us as guinea pigs insofar as they were trying to learn what was required out of the position. So no, I would agree with you. If we could get some of the stalwarts who know what good looks like, they might be long in the tooth, even if they're just an interim board, to just resuscitate Eskom and stop this load shedding, which is killing the economy and killing people in hospitals and ICUs. And I think that would be a great step forward. And then we could, if that happens, we can give the DPA a review and say that, well, at last they came to their senses, which they previously don't seem to have been able to do. So yes, let's start with the stalwarts that have experience and have a track record of knowing what's good at Eskom. So in other words, we're talking about people who were there prior to 2001.
All right. So Ted Blom, I am the Minister of Public Enterprises. I've just appointed you to the board. What 5 points are you going to bring to the first meeting?
Wow. Okay. Well, I thank goodness it's a make-believe situation, because I'm not available. My health and my age doesn't allow me to do that, and I'm also not an engineer. So, but I would gladly try and contribute. The first thing I would do is I'd sort out the corruption. The second thing I do is sort out the feedstock. And that's a job I offered to go and help Mr. De Ruyter. I was asked to do so by Mr. Overall, so I was kicked in the teeth. But I have got experience in that area, and certainly I think it's crucial that if you don't sort out the feedstock, you're going to keep on sitting with boiler tube leaks. Boiler tube leaks are not supposed to happen every day. In fact, they're never supposed to happen. Once you seal a boiler, it's good for 60 years. So if you sort out the feedstock, you won't have boiler tube leaks. So that's the second thing. The third thing is you need to sort out the job descriptions and the productivity of the staff. The headcount is way over the top. Fourthly, you need to sort out the OEMs, get them back on board. I know they've been messed around by successive management teams at Eskom, but only they have the skill set immediately available to rejuvenate the old power stations. Because overseas, even older power stations are in fine nick because they've been properly serviced by OEM parts, not pirate parts. Lastly, I would order a forensic investigation into all the debt and the corruption that arose in that debt, because Eskom shouldn't have a debt book of more than 200 billion. So 250 billion needs to be investigated, the culprits brought to book, the bankers that finance those crooks need to be forced to write off that debt, and then you sit with a healthy, vibrant Eskom. Hopefully we'll be able to fulfill its mandate to provide cheap, reliable, and available power to the whole of the SABC region.
Ted Blom, always great talking to you. Insights greatly appreciated. Thanks for your time.
Most welcome.
Thank you. That's energy analyst Ted Blom talking about the reconstitution of the Eskom board. He doesn't have much faith in those that are going to be picking that board, that they'll do a great job this time around. We'll have to wait and see what happens.